Have you ever wondered why some people seem to thrive effortlessly on routine, hitting their goals day after day, while others struggle to stick to even the simplest habits? Why does waking up early, exercising, or studying feel like a punishment for some, but a joy for others? The answer isn't just about willpower, it's about how your brain is wired. Discipline isn't something you're born with, it's something you can train your brain to enjoy. Imagine a life where following through isn't a battle against yourself, but a path that actually feels rewarding, like your brain wants it. That's what we're going to explore today: how to rewire your brain to enjoy discipline and make it a part of who you are. The very first step in learning to enjoy discipline is awareness, and I want you to really feel this. Your brain is not a neutral observer in your life. It's constantly negotiating between pleasure and pain. Every decision you make, every habit you follow, every impulse you act on is influenced by a survival mechanism that evolved over millions of years. Your brain is wired to seek comfort, to seek immediate rewards, to avoid discomfort at almost any cost. That instinct once kept our ancestors alive, guiding them to food, shelter, and safety. But today, it often works against us. In modern life, the instant gratification it craves is everywhere. Social media notifications, binge, watching your favorite series, scrolling endlessly through feeds, snacking on junk food, even giving in to anger or avoidance rather than doing the hard work. These things trigger a quick hit of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical, which feels good in the moment, but ultimately leaves us unfulfilled and stuck. This is what I call the pleasure trap. Discipline feels painful because it often requires delaying gratification. Going for a run instead of staying in bed, finishing a difficult task instead of scrolling your phone, cooking a healthy meal instead of ordering takeout. These things feel like resistance, like effort that your brain doesn't want to exert. And here's the painful truth. The more we indulge in these quick pleasures, the more our brain craves them, and the harder discipline becomes. Every time we give in, we're strengthening the neural pathways that favor comfort over growth. Every time we skip the hard but meaningful task, our brain learns to avoid effort, and over time, effort itself begins to feel like something to escape from. But here's where it gets powerful. Your brain is not static. It is plastic, adaptable, capable of being rewired. The very thing that makes discipline feel hard can be reshaped gradually, so that effort itself becomes rewarding. Athletes, for example, do not push through grueling training sessions out of hate or obligation. They endure the sweat, the soreness, the early mornings, not because they are born disciplined, but because their brain has learned to associate effort with something far deeper than momentary pleasure. Every drop of sweat, every extra mile, every repetition strengthens a sense of accomplishment, pride, and growth. The act itself becomes pleasurable because the brain now understands it is a signal of progress. Effort is no longer punishment. It is a signal that you are moving toward your potential, toward a better version of yourself. And here's how it works for you. You start small. You don't have to run a marathon or wake up at 4 a.m. Tomorrow, start by taking one small action that replaces a mindless habit with a meaningful one. Instead of scrolling endlessly on your phone, spend 5 minutes doing something that matters. A few pages of reading, a short exercise, a small step on a project that excites you. At first, it might feel awkward. Your brain will resist, pulling you back to comfort, whispering that 5 minutes isn't worth it. But each time you choose effort over escape, your brain is forming new pathways, slowly but surely, that associate discipline with satisfaction, not punishment. Imagine it like training a puppy. The first time it learns to sit on command, there is struggle and confusion. You offer gentle guidance, reward it with a treat, and gradually, what was once effortful becomes natural and even enjoyable. Your brain works in exactly the same way. The more you reward effort and persist in small steps, the more it starts to crave the satisfaction of accomplishment rather than the fleeting comfort of distraction. The tiny victories begin to accumulate. That 5-minute focus session turns into 10, then 20. A simple habit grows, building momentum until it transforms your internal wiring. The critical shift is in perception. The brain loves pleasure, yes, but it can learn to find pleasure in growth, in progress, in mastery. When you start to feel the subtle pride of finishing a task, the quiet satisfaction of self-control, the joy of moving one step closer to your goals, you are literally teaching your brain that effort is rewarding. You are breaking free from the pleasure trap and redefining what feels good. It is not instantaneous. It takes consistency, patience, and an awareness that your comfort zone will resist. But every time you choose the meaningful over the easy, you strengthen a neural pathway that reinforces discipline. Over weeks and months, effort itself becomes pleasurable. The small victories accumulate, and your brain begins to crave growth as much as it once craved instant gratification. The very thing that felt like resistance transforms into your ally, and you begin to discover that discipline is not a burden. It is a source of profound, lasting satisfaction. One of the most powerful ways to start enjoying discipline is to stop thinking about the big, overwhelming goals and instead focus on micro goals, tiny steps that your brain can actually handle and celebrate. Most of us fail at discipline not because we lack potential, but because we aim too high too soon. We set monumental targets, like waking up at 5 a.m., running 5 miles every day, writing 1,000 words each morning, and then we collapse under the weight of expectation. Our brains are smart, but they are also highly sensitive to overwhelm. When a task feels enormous, when the mountain seems impossible to climb, your brain interprets it as a threat and says, "No, not today," even if deep down you know you want to change. This is where micro goals come in. Think of them as stepping stones, small victories that your brain can easily grasp. They are not about instant transformation. They are about showing your brain that discipline is achievable and even pleasurable. Imagine a man who wants to read more books. If he tells himself, "I will read one book every day," his brain panics. That is too much effort, too much change at once. But if he starts with a single page, just one, his brain can handle it. One page might seem almost laughably small, almost insignificant, but that is exactly why it works. That one page triggers a sense of accomplishment, a micro win, and that sense of success releases dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. And once the brain tastes that reward, it wants more. Tomorrow, maybe he reads 2 pages. The day after, 5. And over time, this tiny, consistent progress snowballs into habit, mastery, and eventually, a genuine love for the discipline itself. Micro goals work because the brain loves progress. It is wired to notice improvement, no matter how small, and to reward itself for it. Consider professional athletes again. No sprinter wakes up thinking, "I will break a world record today." That would be impossible, overwhelming, and likely paralyzing. Instead, every training session is a micro goal: 100 meters faster than yesterday, 1 extra push-up, a slightly longer plank. Each small effort strengthens not just the body, but the neural pathways of discipline, teaching the brain to find pleasure in incremental progress. Over time, the brain begins to crave the feeling of improvement itself, and discipline shifts from a forced action into an internal reward system. This principle applies to every area of life: health, learning, productivity, relationships. If you want to exercise consistently, start with just 10 minutes a day. If you want to eat healthier, start by swapping one unhealthy snack for a nourishing one. If you want to write, set a timer for 5 focused minutes instead of staring at a blank page hoping inspiration will strike. These small wins are like tiny sparks. They ignite momentum, and momentum, once it begins, is far more powerful than motivation alone. The brain sees movement and says, "Ah, progress, let's keep going." And that internal momentum begins to carry you forward almost effortlessly. There is also a psychological element here that cannot be overstated. Micro goals reduce the fear of failure. When you set enormous, abstract goals, failure feels catastrophic. Missing a workout, skipping a day of reading, or procrastinating on a big project feels like proof that you are incapable. But micro Goals are forgiving. If you read 1 page instead of 5, if you do 10 minutes of exercise instead of 30, your brain still experiences a win. There is no judgment, no overwhelming pressure, only consistent, manageable steps forward. And over time, these steps reshape not just behavior but identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through, who progresses, who succeeds. Small steps at a time. Real transformation happens in the quiet accumulation of these small victories. The world often glorifies dramatic leaps, but the brain thrives on consistency and repetition. Tiny, consistent actions, often invisible to the outside world, are what build the internal scaffolding for a disciplined life. Imagine a sculptor chipping away at a block of marble. Each tap seems insignificant, almost frustratingly slow, but gradually, a masterpiece emerges. Your brain is no different. Every small, intentional action carves the neural pathways of discipline, shaping you into a person who not only can handle effort, but comes to enjoy it. The beauty of micro goals is that they create momentum, reduce resistance, and let your brain taste the sweetness of success in manageable doses. Over time, what started as a tiny, almost laughable step transforms into a deeply ingrained habit. Your brain begins to crave the feeling of achievement, your confidence grows, and discipline ceases to be a struggle. It becomes natural, even enjoyable, because your brain has learned that the path of effort is the path of reward. And once that shift happens, you no longer chase discipline. You embody it. One of the most profound shifts in learning to enjoy discipline is realizing that motivation is unreliable, fleeting, and often deceptive. But identity is powerful, enduring, and self-reinforcing. Most people try to rely on motivation to stick to their goals. They tell themselves, I need to go for a run, or I need to eat healthy today, or I need to write my book. And for a while, that works. Maybe for a few days, even a few weeks, but then life happens, motivation wanes. You wake up tired, stressed, or distracted, and suddenly that I need to feels like a burden, and your brain, always seeking comfort and avoiding effort, whispers, skip it, rest, indulge. The result: inconsistency, frustration, and self-doubt. The real secret is to stop relying on motivation and instead anchor your habits in identity. Identity is the story you tell yourself about who you are. It is not just what you do. It is who you are at your core. When your habits align with your identity, discipline becomes natural because it is no longer about forcing action. It is about acting in harmony with your self-concept. Think about it this way. If you see yourself as a disciplined person, someone who values growth, effort, and integrity, your actions naturally reflect that identity. Waking up early, finishing your work, exercising, or writing becomes consistent because it is what a disciplined person does, not because you are trying to summon fleeting motivation. Consider the example of athletes again, or anyone who has mastered a craft. They don't rely on motivation alone. They don't wake up every day hoping they feel like practicing. They operate from a strong sense of identity. I am a musician. I am an artist. I am someone who shows up for their growth. This identity guides their behavior even when motivation is absent. And the remarkable thing is that identity and behavior reinforce each other. Every time they practice, every time they show up, they are confirming to themselves, yes, this is who I am. Their brain begins to recognize effort and consistency as aligned with their identity, making discipline feel natural and even enjoyable. You can apply this to your life immediately. It starts with the language you use. Instead of saying, I want to exercise more, say, I am someone who takes care of their body. Instead of saying, I want to write consistently, say, I am a writer. Instead of saying, I need to eat healthier, say, I am someone who nourishes their body. These simple statements are far more powerful than setting external goals because they speak directly to your brain's sense of self. Your subconscious mind begins to internalize these beliefs, and your actions follow naturally. Small actions become proof of identity. When you identify as a disciplined person, even a single choice, waking up early, Finishing a small task, resisting a temptation, becomes a vote for who you are. Your brain notices, and over time, these votes accumulate, reshaping not just your behavior, but your self-perception. The more consistent these actions, the stronger the identity becomes and the easier discipline feels. What once required effort now aligns with your self-concept. You don't have to drag yourself through resistance. The brain wants to act in alignment with identity. Real life stories demonstrate this beautifully. Consider someone who struggled with consistency in their career, health, or learning. They may have failed repeatedly, not because of laziness, but because they were trying to force behavior without a sense of identity. Once they shifted their thinking, seeing themselves as someone who is capable, responsible, and committed, the same actions became effortless. Going for a morning run, sitting down to study, or preparing a healthy meal no longer felt like a struggle. It was simply what a person like them does. That internal alignment turns discipline from punishment into pride, from resistance into joy. The power of identity-based habits also protects against setbacks. Motivation comes and goes, but identity is resilient. If you miss a day or face a challenge, your sense of self keeps you moving forward. You don't beat yourself up for failing. You remind yourself, I am someone who gets back up, who persists, who grows. The brain rewards that alignment with dopamine, reinforcing the pleasure of consistent effort. Gradually, discipline is no longer something you chase. It becomes a reflection of who you are. The transformation begins not with massive effort, but with small, deliberate steps that reinforce your chosen identity. Every time you act in accordance with the person you want to be, your brain strengthens those neural pathways, making it easier to act consistently tomorrow and the next day and the day after. This is how ordinary actions build extraordinary results over time. And this is how you can train your brain to enjoy discipline, not through willpower alone, but by becoming the kind of person who naturally thrives on effort, growth, and consistency. One of the most powerful shifts you can make in learning to enjoy discipline is changing the way you perceive discomfort. Discipline often feels like pain because the brain naturally resists anything that threatens immediate comfort. The moment you try to wake up early, push through a difficult task, or face a fear, your brain screams, avoid this, stay safe, rest. That discomfort is real. It's not imaginary, and most people interpret it as a signal to stop, a sign that effort is something to escape from. But what if I told you that the very pain you feel when pursuing discipline is actually a signal of growth, a marker that you are moving beyond your comfort zone into new levels of strength and capability? Let's start with a simple truth. Growth does not happen in comfort zones. Think of a muscle. When you lift weights, you feel strain, fatigue, even soreness. Your body interprets this as stress. But every time you endure that stress, your muscle fibers adapt, repair, and grow stronger. The discomfort isn't the enemy. It's the signal that transformation is occurring. Discipline works exactly the same way. Every time you push through resistance, you are strengthening not just your skills or habits, but your mental resilience. You are training your brain to associate effort with progress rather than punishment. This shift in perspective is life-changing because it transforms how the brain experiences effort. Instead of seeing a workout, a study session, or a difficult conversation as punishment, you begin to see it as a necessary step toward becoming the person you want to be. The key is reframing pain as growth. Every moment of discomfort is proof that you are stretching, expanding, and stepping into your potential. This is the secret that separates people who struggle with discipline from those who thrive. One chooses to avoid effort. The other chooses to see effort as an ally. Real-life examples are everywhere. Consider children learning to ride a bike. They fall repeatedly, scrape their knees, and feel frustration, fear, and even embarrassment. And yet, they get up and try again. Why? Because deep down, the challenge is exciting. They sense that each fall is a step closer to mastery. Eventually, riding a bike becomes effortless and even enjoyable, but only after enduring discomfort. Adults often forget this lesson. We see discomfort and try to avoid it, but the brain can learn the same way it learned to walk, to talk, to navigate life, by experiencing challenge and associating effort with reward. Another example is in professional life. When someone starts a new job, learns a new skill, or launches a business, the early days are often filled with struggle, mistakes, rejections, failures. They feel like pain. Yet those who persist eventually develop mastery, confidence, and competence. The brain rewires itself to associate these once comfortable experiences with pride, achievement, and the satisfaction of growth. In other words, the more you embrace discomfort as a stepping stone, the more your brain starts to crave the sense of accomplishment that comes with it. You can apply this principle immediately. The next time you feel resistance to a disciplined action, pause and ask yourself, what is this discomfort signaling? How am I growing through this? Perhaps it's the effort of writing a difficult report, resisting the urge to procrastinate, or doing an uncomfortable workout. Every small act of resistance is your brain wiring itself to see effort as valuable, to associate challenge with reward. It's literally changing the way your neural pathways function. Pain transforms into a guidepost, pointing you toward growth rather than warning you away. The emotional component is crucial here. When you reframe pain as growth, the brain begins to anticipate the satisfaction that follows effort. The struggle becomes part of the story of your progress. Think of it like climbing a mountain. The climb is grueling, your legs ache, your lungs burn, and yet every step brings you closer to the summit. The view from the top is breathtaking, not because it was easy, but because the brain has learned to link effort with reward, struggle with triumph. That's the pleasure of disciplined effort. That's how discomfort becomes an ally rather than an enemy, and the more you practice this, the stronger the feedback loop becomes. Each time you push through, the brain releases dopamine not just for the reward at the end, but for the effort itself. Discipline begins to feel less like work and more like progress. The challenges that once intimidated you start to feel exciting. The discomfort becomes a signal of growth, and growth becomes inherently pleasurable. Your brain learns to crave the journey, not just the outcome. By consciously choosing to see discomfort as a marker of growth, you are literally rewiring your brain to enjoy discipline. You transform resistance into a source of motivation. You no longer fear effort, you welcome it. Every difficult task, every challenging day, every moment of pushback becomes a stepping stone, a signal that you are moving forward. This is not theory. It is the natural way the human brain grows, learns, and evolves. And when you embrace it, discipline stops being a struggle and starts being a source of fulfillment, pride, and lasting change. One of the most underestimated tools in learning to enjoy discipline is the power of reward. Most of us think discipline is about willpower alone, forcing ourselves to act despite resistance. And yes, willpower matters, but it is a finite resource. The brain cannot rely on sheer force of will for long. Motivation ebbs and flows, fatigue sets in, and suddenly, all the best intentions collapse. That's why creating a reward system isn't just helpful, it's essential. It's how you train your brain to find pleasure in effort and consistency, rather than avoiding it. The brain craves rewards. From an evolutionary perspective, our ancestors survived because their brains learned to repeat behaviors that provided pleasure, finding food, building shelter, connecting socially. Every small win released dopamine, reinforcing behaviors that improved survival. Today, the principle is the same, but the rewards can be self-designed, internal, and meaningful. The problem is that most people punish themselves for working hard, or worse, ignore the brain's need for reward entirely. Discipline without reward feels like walking a tightrope without balance. It's exhausting, uncomfortable, and unsustainable. To create a reward system that works, you must link your disciplined actions with pleasure in a way that your brain can recognize immediately. The key is timing. If the reward comes only at the end of a long, distant goal, like losing 20 pounds or finishing a massive project, the brain struggles to connect the effort with the satisfaction. That's why small, immediate rewards matter. These are micro pleasures that reinforce behavior, making the act of discipline itself desirable. For example, imagine you want to build a habit of writing every morning. Instead of focusing solely on finishing a 1,000 word essay, pair the act with something small that delights you, listening to your favorite song while writing, enjoying a cup of coffee afterward, or taking a 5-minute walk in the sunlight as a celebration of progress. Your brain begins to associate writing with pleasure, not pain. Over time, the act itself starts to feel rewarding. The neural pathways that link effort to satisfaction strengthen, and discipline becomes a habit that your brain craves rather than resists. Athletes and top performers do this instinctively. They don't just train for some distant trophy. They celebrate each personal best, each extra rep, each improvement in form. That celebration, whether internal or external, is the reward that trains the brain to love effort. It's why someone can spend hours in a gym, running in the rain or lifting weights until exhaustion, and feel exhilarated rather than miserable. Their brain has learned that effort is inseparable from satisfaction, and that association is far more powerful than raw motivation alone. Rewards don't always have to be external. The most enduring and transformative rewards are often internal: pride, sense of accomplishment, or even the quiet joy of knowing you followed through. After completing a task, take a moment to notice your effort, acknowledge it, and allow yourself to feel proud. This internal celebration releases dopamine just like an external treat, reinforcing behavior and gradually teaching your brain to find joy in consistency itself. Over time, your brain begins to crave the feeling of completion, the sense of "I did it," and that craving becomes a self-sustaining cycle of discipline. The effectiveness of a reward system also depends on making the reward meaningful. The brain is more motivated by rewards that are emotionally significant than by arbitrary incentives. For instance, finishing a project that moves your career forward, helping someone in need, or even mastering a skill you've long admired triggers far stronger neural reinforcement than meaningless tokens. The more emotionally connected your reward is to your values and goals, the more the brain associates discipline with fulfillment, not just effort. Another important principle is consistency. The brain strengthens habits through repetition. If you reward yourself inconsistently, the brain is confused, the action may feel arbitrary, and the pleasure loop is weakened. Consistency in rewards, especially small, immediate ones, ensures that your neural pathways for disciplined behavior solidify, gradually transforming effort from a chore into something the brain genuinely enjoys. And there's one final, often overlooked point: the reward doesn't need to be grand. In fact, small, frequent rewards are far more effective than rare, monumental celebrations. The brain learns best in small, repeated doses. Finishing one task, completing one workout, making one phone call, each is a micro win that releases dopamine and reinforces your neural pathways for discipline. These tiny celebrations over days and weeks accumulate into massive transformation. When you implement a reward system thoughtfully, your brain begins to crave effort rather than resist it. Discipline stops feeling like a punishment and starts feeling like a source of satisfaction, pride, and growth. You no longer chase willpower. You follow a path of reward, and the brain wants to stay on it. This is how consistency becomes effortless, how small wins snowball into lifelong habits, and how discipline itself transforms into a source of joy rather than struggle. One of the most overlooked yet powerful strategies for enjoying discipline is embracing routine. It may sound simple: wake up at the same time, follow the same habits, but the impact on your brain is profound. Every decision you make throughout the day takes mental energy. From choosing what to eat, what to wear, or which task to tackle first, your brain is constantly assessing, calculating, and deciding. This process, while essential, is exhausting. By the time you get to the tasks that truly matter, your willpower is already depleted. This phenomenon is known as decision fatigue, and it is one of the main reasons people struggle with consistency and discipline. Decision fatigue isn't a moral failing, it's a biological reality. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-control, attention, and planning, has a limited capacity for making choices. Every decision you make consumes energy and depletes your ability to resist temptation, stay focused, and follow through on disciplined action. That's why evenings often feel harder than mornings, why the more tasks you juggle, the less disciplined you feel. The brain is not lazy, it's simply protecting itself from overload. The antidote to decision fatigue is routine. When you structure your life around consistent habits, you reduce the number of decisions your brain has to make, conserving energy for the things that truly matter. Imagine the life of someone who wakes up at the same time every day, follows a morning ritual of exercise, meditation, or reading, and has a predictable work structure. Their brain doesn't waste energy deciding whether to get out of bed, whether to exercise, or whether to start working. They simply follow the neural pathways they've already built. That energy is then available for growth, creativity, and focus, rather than being drained by trivial choices. This is why top performers, entrepreneurs, and highly disciplined people often live highly structured lives. Steve Jobs famously wore the same style of clothing every day, eliminating trivial decisions so he could focus on creativity and innovation. Benjamin Franklin had a daily schedule so precise it read like a military plan, and he credited it with helping him build extraordinary accomplishments. Their routines weren't about rigidity. They were about reducing the brain's load so it could direct energy toward meaningful action. Routines work because they turn disciplined actions into automatic behavior. The brain loves automation. Once a habit becomes routine, it no longer requires conscious effort or struggle. Your morning workout, your focused writing session, even simple tasks like making your bed or preparing a healthy breakfast become second nature. They no longer feel like battles of willpower. They are simply what you do. And as with all neural pathways, repetition strengthens them, making future action easier, faster, and even enjoyable. There's also a psychological component. Routines create predictability and stability, which the brain craves. When your day is structured, you feel a sense of control and security. That stability reduces stress and anxiety, which often sabotage discipline. The more predictable your environment and habits, the more your brain can focus on growth and mastery rather than constantly scanning for potential threats or distractions. Routine doesn't eliminate challenges, but it primes your brain to respond to them with resilience rather than resistance. Real-life examples show the transformative power of routine. Consider someone trying to exercise consistently. If they rely on motivation alone, every day is a struggle. Do I feel like it today? Am I too tired? Maybe I'll skip. Their brain is constantly debating, and they often lose. But if exercise becomes a non-negotiable part of their morning routine, their brain no longer questions it. The habit happens almost automatically, and with repetition, it begins to feel natural, even enjoyable. The same principle applies to writing, learning, or building any skill. Structure removes friction, conserves energy, and allows discipline to flourish. The key is to start small and anchor routines around high-impact behaviors. It could be a morning ritual, a specific time block for focused work, or even a bedtime ritual that ensures restorative sleep. The brain responds to repetition, and even minor routines can produce disproportionate results over time. Consistency is the secret. The more predictable the habit, the less energy the brain expends, and the more energy it can allocate toward the rewarding part of effort, the sense of achievement, growth, and progress. Routine is not about rigidity or removing spontaneity. It is about removing unnecessary friction, decision fatigue, and wasted mental energy so that your brain can focus on the things that truly matter. When structured habits take over the mundane choices, discipline stops being a struggle. It becomes the path of least resistance, effortless yet powerful. and your brain begins to crave the satisfaction of consistency. Over time, what once felt like effort becomes automatic, natural, and deeply rewarding. That is the subtle power of routine. It transforms your life from a constant battle of willpower into a steady, unstoppable flow of disciplined action. One of the most powerful ways to enjoy discipline is to understand that your brain is highly responsive to cues in your environment. It is constantly scanning for signals, looking for patterns, and reacting to triggers that tell it what to do. The reality is that we are not operating in a vacuum. Our surroundings, the people we interact with, and even the small things we see and touch every day shape our habits far more than we realize. If you want discipline to feel natural, you cannot rely on willpower alone. You must create an environment that nudges your brain toward success. Think about how easy it is to fall into old, unproductive habits. A messy desk, a phone within arm's reach, notifications popping up constantly. Your brain responds automatically, often without conscious thought. Each distraction is a trigger that pulls you away from your goals, reinforcing the pleasure trap we talked about earlier. Conversely, when your environment is deliberately designed to encourage focus and effort, the brain begins to associate these triggers with productive behavior, making discipline feel easier and even enjoyable. Small environmental changes can have outsized effects. Imagine you want to read more. If your books are tucked away on a high shelf, your brain perceives effort in simply accessing them. But if your current book is on your bedside table, open and inviting, your brain receives a subtle signal: this is easy, this is accessible. You are far more likely to pick it up, and over time, this small nudge turns into a consistent habit. The same principle applies to exercise, healthy eating, work, or any skill you want to master. By arranging your environment to support action, you remove friction and create triggers that reinforce discipline automatically. Consider another example: someone trying to eat healthier. If junk food is in plain sight, the brain is constantly reminded of temptation, making resistance feel like a battle. But when healthy options are easily accessible, prepped, and visible, the brain naturally gravitates toward them. You don't have to fight your impulses with sheer willpower. The environment does the work for you. This is not cheating. It is understanding how the brain works and using it to your advantage. Even subtle cues can serve as triggers. A water bottle on your desk reminds you to stay hydrated. A pair of running shoes by the door signals a workout. A sticky note with a motivational phrase can nudge you back to focus when your mind wanders. Neuroscience shows that our habits are approximately 40% driven by cues in our environment. This means that nearly half of your actions are not conscious decisions. They are automatic responses to triggers. Design your environment thoughtfully, and your brain will do the heavy lifting. Social triggers are equally powerful. The people you spend time with, the conversations you engage in, and the energy you absorb from others all influence your behavior. Surround yourself with individuals who model the habits you want to cultivate. People who are disciplined, focused, and growth-oriented naturally encourage you to follow suit. Conversely, environments filled with distraction, negativity, or apathy can sap your motivation and erode discipline. You cannot fully control external circumstances, but you can control your proximity to influences that shape your habits. Real-life examples highlight this effect vividly. Elite performers, athletes, musicians, writers, entrepreneurs often design every detail of their environment to reinforce their goals. From practice spaces that eliminate distractions to structured routines supported by cues, their success is not just talent. It is consistent, intentional alignment of environment and behavior. The brain learns to respond automatically to these triggers, creating momentum and reinforcing discipline. The power of triggers lies in their subtlety. You don't have to rely on massive, dramatic interventions. Often, it is the small, consistent cues, the things you see, touch, and interact with daily, that shape your habits over time. Every time you respond to a positive trigger, your brain reinforces the pathway that connects effort with reward, making disciplined action easier the next time. Slowly, these triggers become internalized. Your brain begins to anticipate action, craving progress and consistency, and discipline feels less like a struggle and more like a natural flow. When you understand this, you realize discipline is not solely about fighting your impulses or summoning willpower. It is about designing your life so that the brain naturally leans toward productive behavior. The right triggers make effort easy, consistent, and even enjoyable. They transform discipline from an uphill battle into a path your brain wants to follow, guiding you toward growth, achievement, and fulfillment with subtle, unstoppable momentum. One of the most overlooked yet powerful tools to enjoy discipline is the practice of visualization. At first, it may sound simple, even abstract, closing your eyes and imagining a goal, but the brain does not distinguish vividly imagined experiences from real ones. When you visualize success, effort, or even the process of discipline itself, you are literally training your neural pathways as if the action were already happening. This is the secret that elite performers, athletes, and high achievers have known for decades. Your mind can practice success even before your body follows. Think about an Olympic athlete preparing for a major competition. They don't just train physically, they spend hours visualizing every movement, every step, every interaction. The swimmer imagines the feel of the water, the rhythm of their strokes, the roar of the crowd. The gymnast envisions each flip, landing, and balance, over and over. Neuroscience shows that these mental rehearsals activate the same neural circuits in the brain as actual physical practice. In other words, by imagining the action in vivid detail, they are pre-programming their brain for success. The effort feels familiar, less daunting, and more attainable. You can apply the same principle to your own life, whether it's discipline in work, health, learning, or personal growth. Close your eyes for a few minutes each day and imagine yourself completing the task that challenges you. Picture yourself waking up early, focusing on your work, completing a workout, or resisting a temptation. Imagine every detail, the sights, the sounds, the feelings, the small victories along the way. Most importantly, imagine the sense of pride, satisfaction, and confidence you feel when you follow through. The brain begins to create a mental blueprint of success, which it then seeks to turn into reality. Visualization works because it trains your brain to associate effort with reward before the effort even occurs. When you imagine following through on a disciplined action, your brain experiences a mini sense of accomplishment. Dopamine is released, the pleasure circuitry is activated, and the action begins to feel rewarding. Over time, this anticipation strengthens the neural pathways for disciplined behavior, making the real, life execution of these actions feel more natural, automatic, and even enjoyable. Consider a student struggling to focus on studying. Every time they open a book, resistance feels overwhelming. But if they spend a few minutes imagining themselves sitting down, understanding the material, and completing their work efficiently, their brain becomes accustomed to the process. It's no longer entirely unfamiliar or intimidating. The next time they sit down to study, the brain already has a map of success, reducing anxiety, resistance, and mental friction. Suddenly, discipline feels less like a battle and more like a continuation of what the brain already knows. Visualization also helps with setbacks. Discipline is rarely perfect. We all face moments of procrastination, distraction, or failure. By practicing visualization, you are mentally rehearsing resilience. You can imagine encountering obstacles, feeling the initial resistance, and then persisting despite it. Your brain begins to internalize the belief that you are capable of overcoming difficulty, and over time, this reduces fear, builds confidence, and strengthens your capacity for consistent action. The emotional power of visualization cannot be overstated. The brain responds not just to the physical, but to emotional cues. By vividly imagining the satisfaction, pride, and joy of completing disciplined actions, you are creating an emotional reward loop. Your brain begins to crave the feeling of accomplishment before the work is even done, which means you start to anticipate the joy of discipline rather than dreading it. It rewires the perception of effort from punishment to pleasure, from resistance to excitement. The practice is simple, but consistency is key. 5 to 10 minutes a day is enough. Close your eyes, take deep breaths, and imagine the actions, the process, and the feelings of success. Repeat this daily, and over time, you will notice a subtle but profound shift. Your brain begins to crave disciplined action. The challenge no longer feels like an external burden. It feels like an internal journey that you are eager to embark on. Visualization is not magic, but it is one of the most effective ways to program your brain for success. It bridges the gap between intention and action, aligns your emotions with your goals, and creates a neural roadmap that makes discipline feel natural, attainable, and even enjoyable. Over weeks and months, the brain learns to seek progress, anticipate reward, and embrace effort as a source of pride and fulfillment. When you pair visualization with consistent action, you are literally training your mind and body to love discipline, transforming it from a struggle into a deeply rewarding habit. One of the most misunderstood aspects of discipline is how we respond to failure. Most people believe that discipline means never slipping, never procrastinating, never making mistakes. But the reality is far different. Discipline is not perfection. It is persistence, and persistence requires that you learn to handle setbacks with care, not with judgment. The way you respond to slips, missed goals, or moments of resistance can either reinforce your brain's pleasure circuits for discipline or sabotage them entirely. This is where self-compassion becomes not just helpful, but essential. The human brain is highly sensitive to judgment, criticism, and shame. When you beat yourself up for failing to follow through on a habit, your brain interprets this as threat, triggering stress responses that make it even harder to act the next time. You may feel guilt, frustration, or despair. And all of these emotions create a feedback loop that pushes your brain away from effort rather than toward it. In other words, self-criticism often punishes you twice, once for the original slip, and again by making future disciplined action feel even harder. Self-compassion, on the other hand, rewires this feedback loop. It teaches the brain to respond to failure with understanding, kindness, and perspective. When you miss a workout, skip a study session, or procrastinate, instead of thinking, "I am lazy, I am weak," you can shift to, "I made a mistake, and that's okay. I can try again." This simple shift reduces stress, lowers resistance, and creates a neural environment where discipline feels attainable rather than punishing. The brain begins to associate effort with safety and growth, not with fear and shame. Consider the example of someone learning a new skill, like playing an instrument or learning a language. Slips are inevitable. They play the wrong note, forget a word, or fail to complete a lesson. Most beginners are harsh with themselves, and the stress and frustration make them more likely to quit. But those who practice self-compassion understand that mistakes are part of the process. They normalize failure, acknowledge it without judgment, and get back to practice. Over time, the brain learns that mistakes are part of learning, not signals to avoid effort. This perspective transforms resistance into resilience and strengthens the neural pathways that support discipline. The emotional component of self-compassion is crucial. Imagine you're trying to stick to a habit, say waking up early for morning exercise. One day you oversleep. The old response might be anger, frustration at yourself, guilt, a sense of failure. But a compassionate response would be, "I missed today, but I can do better tomorrow. Missing one day does not erase my progress." This response reduces stress hormones like cortisol, which otherwise sabotage motivation, and reinforces positive emotions like hope, pride, and persistence. Your brain begins to recognize that following through is rewarding, even when setbacks occur. Self-compassion also builds long-term resilience. Life is unpredictable, and there will always be distractions, challenges, and obstacles. The brain's natural response to stress is avoidance, but self-compassion teaches it that effort is safe, even in the face of difficulty. Each time you respond to a slip with understanding rather than punishment, you are strengthening your neural pathways for persistence, reducing fear of failure, and making discipline more sustainable. You are literally training your brain to enjoy the process of effort rather than fearing mistakes along the way. Real life stories illustrate this beautifully. Successful people in every field, from entrepreneurs to athletes to artists, have faced repeated failures. What separates them from those who give up is not perfection, but the ability to treat themselves with kindness, acknowledge the setback, and continue moving forward. They know that every slip is temporary, every mistake is a teacher, and every moment of persistence reinforces their identity as someone capable, disciplined, and growing. Self-compassion also encourages reflection. When you respond kindly to yourself, you are better able to analyze what went wrong and make adjustments. This creates a feedback loop of learning, growth, and improved performance. Your brain begins to associate disciplined effort not with punishment for failure, but with continuous improvement, self-respect, and achievement. Over time, this mindset transforms discipline from a struggle into a source of pride and fulfillment. The most important takeaway is that slips are inevitable, but they do not define you. What defines you is how you respond. Self-compassion is the bridge that allows your brain to see effort as safe, rewarding, and desirable, even when mistakes occur. It transforms resistance into resilience, stress into motivation, and discipline into a practice that your mind actually craves rather than avoids. In this way, learning to be kind to yourself during setbacks is not just an emotional skill, it is a neuroscience-backed strategy that makes the entire process of building discipline sustainable, enjoyable, and deeply empowering. One of the most important truths about discipline is that it is a marathon, not a sprint. Our brains are not instant machines of change. They are slow, adaptive, and profoundly shaped by repetition. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, is both a blessing and a challenge. It allows us to transform habits, thoughts, and behaviors, but it requires patience, consistency, and time. You cannot rush it, and you cannot expect overnight results. Understanding this is crucial to enjoying discipline rather than resisting it. The brain forms new neural pathways gradually. Each active effort, whether it's exercising, studying, writing, or resisting temptation, is like a tiny chisel striking a block of marble. At first, progress may seem almost imperceptible. You follow through with a habit one day, then the next, and nothing seems to change. Your mind begins to doubt, am I making a difference? Is this effort worth it? This is the point where most people quit, not realizing that the brain is quietly strengthening its internal circuits beneath the surface. Neuroplasticity works invisibly, but its effects are profound and cumulative. Think about learning a musical instrument. The first time you practice a scale, it feels awkward, uncomfortable, and unnatural. Your fingers stumble, your timing is off, and frustration rises. But each day you practice, even just for a few minutes, the neural pathways connecting your brain and fingers become stronger. The movements gradually feel smoother, your coordination improves, and the task begins to feel almost effortless. The magic is that your brain has learned to enjoy the process of mastery itself. Discipline, in this sense, is simply the accumulation of repeated, intentional practice over time. The same principle applies to habits and self-discipline. Small, consistent actions, repeated day after day, gradually transform your neural architecture. The brain begins to associate effort with reward, consistency with pleasure, and growth with satisfaction. But it does not happen in a day, a week, or even a month. Patience is essential. Each small action, every early morning, every completed task, every resisted temptation, is a vote for the person you are becoming. Over time, those votes accumulate into lasting transformation. Real life examples are everywhere. Think of professional athletes, top entrepreneurs, or successful artists. None of them achieved mastery overnight. They trained consistently, sometimes for years, often in isolation, often facing frustration, pain, and failure. What separated them from those who gave up was not innate talent or temporary motivation. It was patience and persistence. They understood that change is a process and that each small, repeated action was rewiring their brain for success. Their discipline became enjoyable because they trusted the process, knowing that the brain naturally rewards consistent effort over time. Patience also reduces the emotional friction that comes with effort. When you expect immediate results, the brain interprets slow progress as failure, which triggers stress, resistance, and self-doubt. But when you understand that neuroplasticity is gradual, each action becomes meaningful in itself, regardless of immediate outcomes. You begin to enjoy the rhythm of disciplined practice, the small victories along the way, and the subtle feeling of progress building day by day. The brain starts to crave the process itself, not just the distant goal. Another critical element is self-compassion combined with patience. The brain responds positively when effort is framed as safe and rewarding. If you slip or fail, remember that transformation is cumulative. Missing a day, making a mistake, or facing a setback does not erase the neural progress you have already made. Each effort, successful or imperfect, contributes to the slow, steady rewiring of your brain. This perspective removes fear and guilt, creating a mental environment where discipline becomes sustainable, even enjoyable. Consider the power of micro-habits in this context. Tiny actions, repeated consistently over time, are the building blocks of neuroplastic change. Reading 2 pages a day, doing 10 push-ups, or spending 5 focused minutes on a project might seem trivial, but these actions accumulate exponentially. The brain recognizes repetition as a signal to strengthen pathways. What once felt effortful eventually becomes automatic, almost effortless, and the pleasure of discipline emerges naturally. The essence of patience in rewiring the brain is trust. Trust in the process, trust in your capacity to change, and trust in the subtle, incremental power of consistent effort. Your brain is learning, adapting, and transforming with every choice you make. The discipline that once felt like a struggle slowly becomes a source of satisfaction, pride, and even joy. Neuroplasticity does not require perfection, only persistence. Each small action, repeated day after day, is a chisel shaping the masterpiece of your character, your habits, and your life. In this way, patience is not passive. It is active, intentional, and transformative. Every act of consistent effort, no matter how small, is a signal to your brain that you are committed to growth. Over time, the neural circuits for discipline strengthen, resistance diminishes, and the very act of following through begins to feel pleasurable. By embracing the slow, steady process of neuroplasticity, you train your brain to love discipline, not as a chore, but as a path to becoming the person you were meant to be. Discipline isn't a burden. It's the bridge between who you are and who you want to become. Each small effort, each tiny habit, each moment of consistency is a vote for the life you deserve. Imagine waking up each day excited to pursue your goals because your brain now craves the process, not just the reward. The path to transformation begins here, today, with the decision to rewire your mind. You have the power to train your brain to enjoy discipline, to embrace growth, and to finally become the person you've always imagined.